Have you followed the Stats Inc. situation?
Oh, I don't know enough. This is the little part that Cecil will clip off. I don't know enough about it to make a good stance on it, but it's one of those things that probably we're lucky that this is not something we've had to deal with more often, fallibility of technology and all that.
There's a lot because this is dragged through 4 days. There's increasing, and they haven't told anybody why, including the people that are affected. They're not giving answers to.
Yeah.
There is speculation that's everything from terrorism to blackmail to espionage.
Right.
That disgruntled employee might have nuked their database. I mean, it's wild.
It's the times that when there's a vacuum, the most fantastical things we can think of fill that vacuum. Right. Because oftentimes it ends up being true. But we will try to stick semi to reality as we go live here. Hello, everybody. What is the outlook for Dalvin Cook? That and more this week on The Couch. It's Paul Charchian's week, so we're going to start with the Vikings in a big fantasy story, maybe one of the biggest. Dalvin Cook, Charch, we know he's not going to be out there for week 6, reevaluated before week 8. That doesn't sound like week 8 is a sure thing either.
Groin injuries are always tricky. Sig, you've done this a long time. You know that running backs in particular, this is, it's an injury that unfortunately is a bad match for running backs. And we've seen a lot of aggravate easily. And Dalvin Cook, this is always the specter with Dalvin, right? Is these nagging injuries, sometimes season-ending injuries. And, here we are. We made it through 4 games and not even through 5 games with Dalvin before he gets shelved again. This is part of the risk that you baked into his ADP where, we're not for this. He arguably could have been the second player off the board. The understanding that we have here in Minnesota is 99% chance that he misses this next game. Then they go on by. The feeling is he will likely be available week 8, but even that is not necessarily a sure thing. And it doesn't make necessarily for a compelling play to go get Alexander Mattison. You're only guaranteed 1 game. And granted, this game looks great, and I think he's going to clock in probably my top 12 running backs for this week, I would guess. As the predominant starter, we'll get a little Mike Boone in there as well. So it'll be one great start for Madison. That's probably about it, unfortunately.
And until we see what happens next, because as you said, with these groin issues, it can be tricky. Once the injury seal is broken, certain players, Paul, once the injury seal is broken, Sammy Watkins comes to mind in another one of those stories from this week. Real quick, while we're on Minnesota, it was nice to see an emphasis on Irv Smith.
Yeah,
who can play.
Yeah.
But then you also see Justin Jefferson, who can also play. You see his numbers come down in a corresponding way. Or maybe I'm drawing that connection and it's unnecessary. But is this a pass offense, if they're using everyone rationally, that can only really feed one mouth?
I think there's 2 mouths to be fed in any one game, Sig. And Thielen's always one of them. So it's going to be 1 and 1 plus 1. And Thielen plus 1, and who his plus 1 is on a week-to-week basis will be part of the exercise for people to figure out. Now, Irv, this is the first time we've really gotten the look at Irv Smith that we were promised by this coaching staff all offseason. They had talked about radically expanding his role, giving him a much higher snap count, and none of that developed until this past week against Seattle. And unfortunately, Seattle secondary is so bad, it's hard to even use that as a fair litmus test. Still, Smith is believed to have incredible upside, and, if he were a slightly better blocker, and his blocking is not bad, but not good enough to jar loose Kyle Rudolph, then I think he'd be much more of a full-time player and much more reliable. As it stands, I think he's addable only in deeper leagues and dynasty leagues for sure, but only in deeper leagues. I still think you're going to see great variance out of Irv Smith, unfortunately, for the time being. And in part, by the way, let's mention this as well. Vikings pass blocking the offensive line is so bad that you're going to get a lot of variation just in what Kirk is able to do with that line anyway.
Yeah, it's too bad. The Vikings season would be looking different if they just executed on that 4th down, or Madison had executed 2 and 3 and 1 and 4. It just feels a lot different, although it's a long, hard slog this season. And even 1 and 4 teams, like the team that Minnesota beat to get the 1, Houston, they're probably not considering themselves out of anything right now, nor should they. Let's look at quarterbacks, Paul.
All right.
And some of this it's funny. 3 players now really on my mind from week 5. Justin Herbert, just because of his incredible announcement to the league, to people watching at home. Not that he hasn't been playing like this, but it was on a tremendous stage. Ryan Fitzpatrick, just because it's always fun to talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick. But Dak Prescott looms over week 5. The tragedy, as much as there are tragedies on the field in the NFL. But what Prescott underscores is how this year the stud quarterback has really pulled away from the field to the point where the field, even 20 to 25 points isn't that difficult to harvest if you did okay on your number 2 quarterback pick, or you quickly picked up Gardner Minshew or Teddy Bridgewater or someone like that. But still, that gap of scoring in the 30s to scoring in the 20s is very significant. Yeah. How is that affecting how you're looking at fantasy lineups now, fantasy strategy, now that we're 5 weeks in?
Well, don't you think, I think very broadly, Sig.
Yeah.
Especially the type of fantasy players that watch this or listen to this podcast, you, me, we tend to feel like we're so smart, we will find quarterbacks. We will mine round 8, round 9, round 10, round 11, round 12, and we will unearth quarterbacks that will help our team. And I think there's something of I think there's a real temptation to almost take a sneering approach towards the people that blow 3rd round picks, 4th round picks, 5th round picks on quarterbacks. But those are the guys who are getting paid. Those are the people that took Kyler Murray, that took Josh Allen, that took Dak Prescott, that are now in a really comfortable position, are getting tremendous production out of those spots. And most of these other quarterbacks, by and large, really haven't panned out or have just been mediocre. And if you thought you were going to patch together wins with, Matthew Stafford and Carson Wentz and Baker Mayfield and Phillip Rivers and Ryan Tannehill, it's just not happening. So, those are, I think for those that didn't necessarily have, I'll call it hubris, to think that they would automatically find help and just, rely on their own wits and savvy to find help. It just hasn't worked out this year.
I think that if you looked at Aaron Rodgers and you thought it's just not rational that Rodgers is going this low, that one has worked out.
It has.
There are, I will say this, there are some players coming on, offenses coming on even, like the Raiders and Derek Carr, like Teddy Bridgewater and Carolina, that are helping close the gap. But absolutely, if you want to win your championship, having one, I guess now without Dak Prescott, you've got Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Deshaun. Well, okay, let's talk about Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, are we feeling like what we saw last week is a sign of what's to come? Or is it really just playing Jacksonville with their 2 best players on defense? It wasn't a great defense to begin with. And hey, let's see. It's Tennessee next week. That's also not ideal circumstances with Tennessee playing on a short week, and they may have some players out. Looking ahead, maybe Houston, Green Bay is when we get a more accurate picture. Or are you ready to be positive about Brandon Cooks, about Shaun Watson, about this Houston offense?
I'm ready to be more positive about him in particular, just because I think he's a tremendous gifted athlete and he's got good enough help around him, including Jordan Akins, who comes back. You're right. Jacksonville's pretty easy. Tennessee has been a mediocre and inconsistent secondary. I guess we'll get another read of them in a few hours. Green Bay will be tough. But even after that, Jacksonville, Cleveland.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of opportunities here for that offense to do well. And I'm much more optimistic, and I'm not going to take any cheap shots at Bill O'Brien here as he, goes out the door either. And but I feel like just the components are all worth, what's the phrase? The sum of the total of the parts. Yeah. There's just, the sum of the total of the parts is just so high for Houston. I think they'll do fine. And I'm still very optimistic on him. I'm really glad you mentioned Derek Carr. Do you remember the game? It was 3 weeks ago when they played Bill Belichick, and Belichick, he stifled all the underneath passing.
Double covered the check down.
Yeah, double covered the check down, and everybody on the internet blows up with, well, Derek Carr can't pass. Somebody finally broke the code. We've got a blueprint on him. And then here we are, the 2 days after Henry Ruggs is blowing up these deep bombs, and this offense looks very different, and Derek Carr's playing well. And I love to see people that overcome the especially negative, I guess, cacophony of voices that are out there. And, tribute to him and what appears to be some pretty good drafting, and hopefully that'll continue for that offense. I want only good things for that offense. And the more they can diversify and stretch defenses, that much better for everybody.
Yes. And the more they can make the AFC bracket feel wide open.
Yeah.
Because it was a tight game, but tactically on both sides of the ball, you could tell that the Raiders had a winning game plan and winning execution from their players. And Henry Ruggs coming back made all the difference. And you have alignment between a philosophy and personnel when they take Ruggs as the first wide receiver off the board. And somewhere Al Davis's ghost is smiling and nodding, like the Emperor Palpatine or something like that. Saying, my vision is still, because Mark Davis even said his dad was always trying to find someone to replace Cliff Branch. Yeah. And my good pal Eric Stoner mentioned too that not only Derek Carr in this Raiders offense, but the Chargers offense would fit in well in the old AFL and the way that those guys play quarterback. And it's incredibly entertaining for fantasy too. But Ruggs being back makes all the difference for this Raiders offense. And John Gruden too. I mean, let's talk about like the Bills and the Raiders and just the value of giving somebody that's not Adam Gase and not Bill O'Brien, like 3, 4, 5 years to really implement their plan and follow through and get buy-in from everybody. And that's the kind of win that in that locker room, Paul, is going to cement buy-in. If we can, did you see the item that, I don't know if it was made up or not, but it's fun for urban legend stuff that they had the bus driver take a victory lap around Arrowhead. I didn't know that. Fun. That's great. It's fun for the Raiders, and it certainly should be a signal, because Bill Belichick also stifled Patrick Mahomes last week. It should be a signal to the AFC that it's there for the taking. And even, again, for the Texans, real quickly on Bill O'Brien, because I know you said you don't want to take any cheap shots at him, and we don't want to do that. We're uplifting, but because you've been close to the league and covered the league for a long time, did you find it unusual how much talk there was about O'Brien's manner in the building and how he treated people? Is that something that stood out as opposed to how it usually goes down when someone gets fired?
Well, it did stand out, although to the surprise of not very many people, even those of us that weren't in the building. But there had been talk before, and you look at the players that have come and gone. I mean, the DeAndre Hopkins situation was certainly an omen, right? That things were not right interpersonally between himself and coaches, because you don't get rid of DeAndre Hopkins for on the field reasons. So, yeah, I guess, not surprised. And, Sig, it's just like so many things in this world, the more humanely you treat each other and the better person you are, the more latitude and forgiveness you have in life. And no matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about parenting or friendships or, the people you meet at school and at work, and just, if you have so much more latitude to make mistakes. And you see this with coaches all the time. These hard-nosed, brittle coaches who nobody likes, and if the first moment there's trouble, they're gone. Yeah. And you can be a good person and survive a lot longer. Leslie Frazier survived in the Twin Cities for a lot longer than he would have. He's a great guy, and everybody liked him. Nobody wanted to see him go and give him every last chance to fail, which ultimately he did, but as just one example. So I just think there's a life lesson here to come out of Bill O'Brien.
Yeah, and it's funny that who's holding, like in the Etu Brute, Etu JJ Watt, again, but just that we even know that. Just that we even know that there was a player revolt, and JJ Watt basically said, no more.
And JJ Watt, but it comes down to who's on the right side of any disagreement between JJ Watt and almost anybody, let alone Bill O'Brien. I'm going to take JJ Watt's side. And
the ownership is too. And Bill O'Brien found out. I think if we try to piece it together, Paul, it's that Bill O'Brien could not coexist with personalities as big as his in the building, and he found out there was one bigger. And once you cross that line, there's no crossing back. So the reality show, the NFL, always continues as exciting as always. Let's go back to old Dak Prescott and, just that sad moment. But also, we carry on. The Cowboys carry on. Andy Dalton. For some of those teams that don't have your Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, etc., is Andy Dalton a good consolation? Will the structure of this offense keep him in high fantasy company, or playing the fourth and fifth offensive tackle will catch up with you when Andy Dalton's your quarterback?
I'm optimistic. Just so many targets, so many qualified targets. On any given play, you could have 6 targets that can all catch, right? You've got 4 receivers, including Cedric Wilson. Dalton Schultz is a legitimate target. Ezekiel Elliott, one of the best pass-catching backs in the NFL. It feels like, even with all of the churn on that offensive line, which I'm really glad you mentioned, Andy Dalton's poised to do particularly well here. And I love the fact that he just did what he did in the, coming in at the final third of that game, rallying the Cowboys to a victory, only throwing 2 incompletions the rest of the way, completing long passes. It feels to me that he's going to be a startable fantasy asset most weeks going forward. And even more so when you look through that Dallas schedule, and there's only 2 real stoppers the rest of the way. Other than the Steelers in week 9 and at Baltimore in week 13, you're going to have a fairly compelling play. Maybe San Francisco week 15, depending on their injury situation. You're going to have a starting grade on Andy Dalton most of those games. Do you see it differently than
No,
that?
I don't. And I would just say, in an overarching way, take the over on expectations for the pieces of the Cowboys offense going forward. It probably will be better than the initial dread that creeps in if you had any Cowboys knowing that Dak Prescott wasn't going to be out there, like you said, partially because of the matchups. But we'll see. It'll be an interesting game. I feel like there's been some great Cowboys-Cardinals games over the years. And that's part of our Monday night double dip with Buffalo and KC this week. There's a lot of good stuff on the schedule this week. Green Bay, Tampa Bay, the Bay of Pigs. That game looks very compelling. Cleveland, Pittsburgh matters again. Paul,
how about that?
Cleveland Pittsburgh is a Titanic tilt. I know.
Oh, I'm so happy for Kevin Stefanski, who was somebody I had the pleasure to work with and around, doing my job just through radio. I've met many times. The most even-handed, level-headed, thoughtful, smart guy you could ever want in coaching. Really, in many ways, the opposite of Mike Zimmer in a lot of ways. Right. But I love that he has brought organizational calm to the Browns, and settled all of the ups and downs and the turbulence. This is a non-turbulent team and has been since he got there. Something we haven't been able to say about the Browns in a decade. I don't know. It's in the fact that they're winning on top of all of it is just it's heartening, and I don't think it's a mirage. I really do believe that we're seeing a real sea change in the entire organization that's manifesting itself. Now, when they can finally get that secondary back and healthy, then I think these Browns get really dangerous. And at some point, Greedy Williams comes back, and Denzel Ward's at 100%. And I think at that, then maybe at that point we're really talking about them challenging for the division.
Yeah, again, the AFC kind of feels wide open. You mentioned the word brittle. You mentioned Mike Zimmer. And Stefanski seems like the opposite of that. Flexible, pliant, malleable. And we've seen it where he's not married to the Kubiak zone running. The Cleveland also running power, running it well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also even last week, not married to setting the tone with the running game. You're facing a tough run defense, come out and pass.
Mm-hmm.
And doing things, I think, to excite Odell Beckham.
So smart.
Yeah. Look, tactically, whether it works or not, to give Odell Beckham a chance to throw a pass, to give Odell Beckham the chance to catch a pass from Jarvis Landry, and so on, to give him a chance to have an end around with the game on the line against Dallas.
How smart.
These are things that are engaging him. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can celebrate that. We want Cleveland to be good. We want the Raiders to be good. Football's better when the Raiders and Browns are good. Yeah. Oh,
for sure, absolutely, which hasn't happened in a long time. And you raised such a good point. I think there are some coaches that have tried to beat down Odell to assert their own power and put Odell in his place and make sure he knows the pecking order. And I love that Kevin just flipped it on his head and said, "We're going to give you we're going to engage you every game and find new and different ways to get you the ball, and let's unlock the potentially our best offensive player." Great.
Yeah, and I think that, and this goes back to Bill Belichick, who we think of as the hard ass, but actually has a ton of trust in his players. And when you have a team prepared to have multiple modes, that requires trust from the coaches, as opposed to an old school way of, we're going to do this, we're going to learn to do it well, we're going to learn to do it better than anybody else, and if you can stop it, then good on you. No, we're going to do things that maybe just this week we find that this is the best way to attack a weakness of the opponent, and we're going to learn to do that this week, and we're going to trust you to do it. And it sure seems like Stefanski's that kind of coach. I wish Grant Delpit was healthy.
Wouldn't that be nice?
On the subject of Belichick, we have multiple reports, by the way, not just Manish Mehta, and I like Manish. Manish is a Audible alum. I think that in a market like New York, a Manish is definitely needed and welcome, especially covering an organization like the Jets. They kind of were made for each other, the Adam Gase, the Johnsons, Jets, and Manish. Love you, Manish, if there's any chance that you're hearing this. Anyway, not just Manish, Costello, Bell, LeVeon on the trade block. And I can't help but think of Bill Belichick when I hear that, Paul. But what do you think about the chances he'll get traded? Do like about $7 million for the rest of the year? Although the Jets sound like they're kind of at the end of their rope, so maybe they'll eat some of that to get a third-day pick. I think they're flexible, but is there anything left in the tank for Bell? What do you think of Bell? What do you think of this situation for fantasy and just for the NFL?
Well, the temptation is to say Le'Veon Bell's cooked because he has not passed the eye test for 2 years, and it's what we've seen has looked mundane. But then we look at Robbie Anderson,
right,
or Ryan Tannehill, and you just, all right, you take almost any reasonably qualified athlete and get him away from Adam Gase, and good things happen. So I'm not writing it off. Jets will have to eat some of the money. I can't imagine anybody's going to pick up what is almost $1 million a week for the rest of the way, or I guess
$500,000, or so.
$500,000, $750,000 the rest of the way. I don't think anybody's going to pick that up. But if the Jets want to get out of this deal, that's their parachute right there. The question, I guess, is if you're the Jets, why do you want out so bad? Other than if you're not going to save the money, if you're going to end up eating the money anyway, why do you want him gone? Is he that bad in the locker room? Is he that bad on the field? Is it just that Frank Gore's giving you the same return? I think it's fair to wonder why they want out if it isn't the money and they're only going to get a third-day draft pick. Okay, then why do you want Le'Veon Bell out of the organization so bad?
I'll be Gase's advocate here. Okay.
Sure.
He never wanted him in the first place.
Yeah.
First of all, they tried to trade him at the trade in the Costello article. They were talking about trading him at the trade deadline. They were open to trading him in the offseason. So this is just situation same as normal. SM with AFU. A snafu when it comes to Le'Veon Bell and Gase. And also, if we're going to simulate Adam Gase's psychology, Charch, it's like, I just don't want anyone to ask me about this anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to deal with this anymore. I want to coach the players that want to be here and want to do what I tell them to do. Le'Veon Bell's not one of those players.
No, I don't think he is one of those players. Which, by the way, and I think you're right, Gase didn't want him. Which they should have known going in that this was going to be an unhappy marriage. Yeah. These two guys were not going to coexist peacefully.
I still think Bell's got something left in the tank, though.
Do you?
I still think he looks, 80, 90% of peak Bell. Certainly good enough to get it done. And I think there's any contender should be interested in adding him. And I think that folks shouldn't just look at the backfield depth chart. Yeah. Every team can use a Le'Veon Bell. Who can't use Le'Veon Bell? Who can't benefit from him being in their offense?
I'll give you the ideal landing spot. Chicago Bears. They're planning to win this. To win this year. They're very extraordinarily thin at the position. By the way, I did Chicago radio today, and they're pulling their hair out over the decision to let Mike Davis go.
Yeah.
What could he have been to our team right now? Yeah, it's they're inexplicable.
Be consistent, right? I mean, they paid him a decent amount of money. Well, would they give him like $3 million a year, something like that? So if your talent valuation says he's worth that, then why release him partway into the first year? And also, Paul, something that draws to my attention is, and we haven't said a lot of nice things about Marty Herney. I mean, it was kind of under the radar that he even like came back to the Panthers after how things ended.
Yeah.
But I'm going to hold him or give him credit, not hold him responsible. Give him credit for the Panthers claiming Davis. They did. It wasn't like Davis sat out there as a street free agent and then they brought him in. You know, they had to take on the contract to bring him on, and they did. And it seemed like a minor footnote move. And now it's not just saving their season; it's showing the quality of the offense, and they're tied for first place,
which is unbelievable. And there were a lot of people guilty that thought that Teddy Bridgewater is the sort of quarterback that doesn't harm an offense and doesn't necessarily help an offense, and it's really limits what an offense can do around it with the arm limitations that he's got.
Yeah,
and while the arm limitations are still largely there, they're succeeding anyway. And I get nervous when you have an offense that's predicated on, everything's going to be within 10 yards, but our athleticism is going to overcome that. And that's a tough sell, but this Panthers offense has managed to do it. And freaking Mike Davis, for the love of God, the passing, the receptions, they just plugged him right into Christian McCaffrey's role. He caught 9 of 10 targets last week, 5 of 6 the week before, 8 of 9 the week before, 8 of 8 the week before. Sig, it's nuts. They just said, you know what? We like you so much. We're not changing anything. You just go run Christian's routes.
It's very likely, Paul, even if Christian McCaffrey comes back, say in 2 weeks, that we will see Mike Davis as the waiver wire pickup of the year. I mean, he'll have done more to help fantasy teams than anybody else that was available on the waiver wire this year.
Yes, he has given you RB1 production for what's going to be 5 weeks.
Yeah,
I mean, that's an important part of the whole thing. Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. And I didn't necessarily see it coming more because you thought, okay, things will get a lot more difficult for this offense without McCaffrey. And Mike Davis. I mean, just seeing him getting that extended time reminds us that even when he was at South Carolina, he was the kind of player that you could queue up one string of plays and say, wow, he's going to be a really good pro, and string up another run of plays and say, oh, I don't know. And depending on what year of his tape you were watching, you got different feelings about him. But no doubt, and the Panthers are rallying around Teddy Bridgewater, and I don't think there's anybody out there saying it's a shame they're winning these games because tank for Trevor and all that. You establish winning culture. And what's great too about both of these, by the way, just to draw this back together to the Kevin Stefanski conversation, is Stefanski, the 2 fake punts, I think, against Baltimore when they just got thrashed in week 1.
Yeah.
Matt Rule running the fullback on 4th and short with a game on the line instead of Christian McCaffrey against the Raiders, and that loss isn't looking bad at all now because Henry Ruggs was mostly healthy for that game. And they, first game as an NFL head coach, maybe you learn the limits of your wisdom, and now things have really got turned around and going for this team. I said a little bit earlier that I wanted to talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick just because, I mean, I said, Paul, he won't make the Hall of Fame, but he'll make the Hall of Memorable, first ballot. You'll remember him. You'll remember watching him, and players will remember playing with him. But they went to San Francisco, and it's funny. I think it's just because we've been around for a while. Every time I see a matchup that was a Super Bowl, it brings back the memories. Miami, San Francisco brings back the memories. But this one, Jimmy Garoppolo, barely removed from a Super Bowl, looks like he's broken. And I sometimes stretch to try to come up with things, but it didn't feel like as much of a stress as it sounded like when I thought, what's Jimmy Garoppolo's confidence like going into this year? After really, you can say like he should have been a Super Bowl winner. It was on him that they didn't win, or at least didn't have a chance to win at the end. His confidence looks shot. But meanwhile, Ryan Fitzpatrick has this Dolphins team brimming with confidence. And that, for fantasy, that affects the values of guys like Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, Mike Gesicki, even Myles Gaskin. Maybe we'll have a Matt Breida sighting. And for San Francisco on the other side, it feels like, is this going to be one of the trash heap offenses? With outside of Raheem Mostert, who looks like he shot out of a cannon, if they don't get good quarterback play, are you concerned and excited based on that wild Week 5 result, or do you want to see more before you do anything about it?
Now, when you say wild result, are you talking about the Dolphins side of that, or are you talking about the 49ers side?
The whole thing.
Yeah. I love Ryan Fitzpatrick. Who doesn't? Yeah. I mean, how can you have any appreciation for the game of football and not love seeing Ryan Fitzpatrick? The unflappable nature, the willingness to give up his body, the obvious, just exuding leadership out of every pore in his body. You can tell that the players want to win for him. And some guys just got it. He's got it. Kirk Cousins has none of that, as an example. He has whatever that intangible it is that makes people want to run through a wall for you. He doesn't have any. Fitzpatrick's got it all. Do you see what Mike Gesicki said about him yesterday?
Best teammate. Want to play 15 years with him. Yeah.
You're right. I want to finish my career with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Now, think about his willingness to say that on the record when his team just spent the 5th pick on the draft on Tua. And you just said, I want to spend the rest of my career with Ryan Fitzpatrick as my quarterback. It's amazing. You can't not be happy for him, his success. And, you mentioned he won't go in the Hall of Fame. And you know what? He won't. And it makes me a little sad. His career numbers, he's going to finish with Hall of Fame caliber career numbers.
Yeah.
It's let me see can I quickly pick it up? No, wait, I've got it here. Ryan Fitzpatrick has 35,000 yards in his career. He has 217 touchdowns. I mean, I understand you almost have to have a ring to find your way into the Hall of Fame as a quarterback, but at the end of the day, he's going to, assuming he plays a couple more years, he's going to be right statistically in the conversation where you're going to say, you know what, the numbers suggest he should be here. He won't, but yeah. Now for the 49ers, got to have the level of concern is pretty high right now, right? Churning through quarterbacks. And I am not necessarily buying everything that Kyle Shanahan was telling us about the ankle and that it affected his throwing. There were just bad decisions being made on the field. And the game looked too fast for Jimmy Garoppolo last week. And that was Miami. And I think you can't help but be concerned with with what we saw on the field. Do you see it differently than that? No.
And I mean, you diminished expectations for Samuel. You diminished expectations for Brandon Ayuk, for George Kittle. Even for Raheem Mostert, just because of game scripts. I think it is critical. I won't be surprised if Kirk Cousins is the quarterback in San Francisco eventually. It's funny that you drew that link there, and not for that reason. I am concerned about San Francisco. We're going to see them on Sunday night against the Rams. And that's going to be now. Flip side of that is the Rams are 4-1, but the 4 is the NFC East. So what do we really know about the Rams?
Right.
I mean, they did have a good half against Buffalo, but Buffalo did the same thing they did in the playoff game last year, where they just kind of let up and said, "Well, we got this game," and they were able to get bailed out by an iffy pass interference call. And down in New Orleans, say, Rams lose on an iffy pass interference call."
Right.
Go figure. Those calls can really burn you. So watching San Francisco, it's definitely a bit concerning, although Raheem Mostert is someone that I'm willing to put a chip on just because he's playing so well. Doesn't it make sense, Paul, to just retrench your whole offense around Raheem Mostert? I mean, which
they can do. We've seen it. Look at the playoff run that they made.
Yes.
Kyle Shanahan can engineer that offense to really minimize the quarterback in a way that we saw in the playoffs that you almost never do. So, and that might be the best thing now. I see it here in Minnesota a lot with Kirk, where they really try to only ask Kirk to make a handful of big plays every game. And I think that might be where we are right now with Jimmy Garoppolo in this passing game, is that they're going to dramatically reduce volume, only ask their quarterback to make a handful of plays. Presumably it'll be Garoppolo, although who knows? I can't even tell you that. I mean,
if he loses the confidence of the team, I mean, I think there's behind the scene dynamics that we just can't see. And maybe he also had a concussion last week or got knocked a little hard that took him out of the zone, but we'll see. We all get to watch on Sunday night on the Fitzpatrick front, by the way, just to go off on this. And I just can't help but wax rhapsodic about Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I actually found out that one of my followers, Andrew S., at Crimson Mo 71, was Fitzpatrick's teammate at Harvard. So he was
wow.
Yeah, he was telling me some stories. He Fitzpatrick led them back from a 21-0 deficit twice. One of the years was the year they went 10-0. Wow. He said Fitzpatrick loved to take on all comers in the weight room, even the dudes that outweighed him by 100 pounds.
Wow.
And so they knew, right? I think that the people that played with him at Harvard knew that he was made out of something different. Just to go over this, I did this on my Twitter feed, but folks, you're very indulgent, so I'm going to indulge myself. Fitzpatrick's first game, Paul, you remember Fitzpatrick's first game If I say Ryan
Rams,
Fitzpatrick.
right? He's Rams.
Yep.
Came in relief of somebody like mid-game and threw like 3 touchdowns out of the blue. Something like that, right?
And a game winner in overtime.
Wow.
33-27 against the Texans.
How about that?
He had over 300 yards in his debut in a half and overtime. Came in down 24-3. He said that he was thinking about the game, I think it was against Dartmouth, that Andrew had brought up in my Twitter feed, when he said he had to get the guys fired up. He knew he had to get the team fired up. So here's the genesis of Ryan Fitzpatrick, NFL quarterback. Jamie Martin was actually the quarterback that got hurt in that game. Some of the things that Ryan Fitzpatrick has done in his career. He was the first quarterback to throw for 400 yards in 3 straight games. Oh, yeah. He's the first quarterback to beat a team. It was the Jags. Sorry, Jags fans. With 6 different teams. He's beaten when he beat them with Miami earlier this year. He is now beating the Jags as a member of 6 different teams. He tied Joe Namath's record for throwing 4 50-plus yard touchdowns in the first 2 games of the season. He tied Manning and Marino for having 4 400-yard games in a season. He has the Bills record for longest touchdown pass ever, 98 yards. He has the Texans record for most touchdown passes in a game with 6. He has the Jets record for most touchdown passes in a season with 31. He's done it, you know? And and I know he's not going to make the Hall of Fame, okay? He's in my Hall of Fame because, okay, was he ever the dominant player in his era? No, of course. Can you tell the story of football without him? I don't think you can. I don't think you can, Paul, because think about this. We're casting the movie of football, like the movie of the story of professional football. And Ryan Fitzpatrick is that guy, just like you mentioned, that it happens to him on every team he's on, basically, that they have a young player at quarterback that they invest a ton in. And Ryan Fitzpatrick is just there to be a bridge quarterback, and he's too good to bench.
He's too good. Yeah,
he's too good, and they have to keep playing him. That's how he's compiled all those stats. Maybe his stats, you might say he's a compiler, but he had to fight and prove over and over again that he can play to be able to play and get those stats again and again. That's the thing about football. In this time that I would say the meritocracy is a myth, and it always was a myth, the NFL is one of the closest things we have to a meritocracy, where if you can play, no matter what they thought about you before that, you're going to get to keep playing. And he's part of that story. He's a character. He's that character that they doubt me. They don't think I'm as good as this high pedigree, high-born quarterback that they drafted. And I'm good. I'm going to watch them. And like you said, I'm going to get my guys to play for me.
So. Has any quarterback to that point, Sig? Has any quarterback succeeded against the will of his own team?
Right.
More than he has. He's predominantly been on teams to either help coast to a high draft pick and absorb losses and then turn the reins over at some point. The whole organization's tilted against him, and he doesn't care. He just goes out and wins. And last year being the almost perfect example of that, when everybody, and why wouldn't you feel like the Dolphins were playing entirely to get the first pick in the draft, and he just willed that team to victories down the stretch, and now he continues to do it again. It's such a great story.
He blew up the shield that left the Death Star ready to be blown up by the Titans. So he's part of the NFL story, all-time story there too. Ryan Fitzpatrick, our ode to Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he's still going to be a good fantasy quarterback. We never really addressed this, but
top 10.
And this week against the Jets for sure. And he's been a top 10 quarterback. So, maybe there are some quarterbacks that can help you if you don't have one of those stud quarterbacks. It was an exciting quarterback week. Not exciting if you have Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, boy,
first week.
This is a real difficult spot, isn't it?
Right. So his value is either going to keep sliding and you're going to wish you got out.
Yep.
Or let's say, and I'm trying to be fair to Edwards-Helaire, it's just the Kansas City offense. It's overwhelming. Eventually, the dam's going to break. He's going to get his, and you'll be happy that you held out.
Okay, so I think the real X factor here is a struggling offensive line that people aren't talking about, and is now without Kelechi Osemele. So this was an offensive line that, to my eyes, hasn't given Clyde Edwards-Helaire very much room to work with. Also have not done a great job with pass protection either, for that matter, although that gets masked a lot by Patrick Mahomes' unbelievable athletic ability. And I can't tell you that line gets much better is my worry. When we saw those, was it 6 carries from inside the 5 that he had in week 1, Sig? Mm-hmm. And every one of those runs was blown up behind the line of scrimmage. Nobody, not Walter Payton, not Barry Sanders, not Emmitt Smith was going to score on those handoffs. And since then, he's gotten, I think, 1, maybe 2 carries from inside the 5, maybe even inside the 10, and that's it. And that worries me as well, because I worry that the team doesn't necessarily think he can succeed there. And if Andy Reid doesn't trust him there, he may not get the ball. Now, they tried running him wide at least once near the stripe last week, and I was happy to see that. And he made a couple of yards, but didn't end up scoring on that play. But I'm really worried we're looking at a 5-touchdown season for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And that's just, from a fantasy standpoint, he's only going to be able to chip in so much if you don't ultimately get some of the touchdowns. And right now, I feel like he's got to score from distance. So do you see it any differently than that?
No.
Sig?
No, I think that the side you probably want to take here is see if you can get 75 cents on the dollar for the first round price tag that Edwards-Helaire came with. Mm-hmm. And it was so hopeful after week 1 because you saw the short area quickness lead to that long touchdown. Like you said, touchdowns from distance. You barely saw him involved in the passing game because he didn't need to be because the Texans didn't answer the bell for that game. But what you're seeing now is, and I mean, maybe the answer is we underestimated Damian Williams. I mean, maybe we should have been giving Damian Williams a lot more credit than we have been.
Maybe.
Because Damian Williams is so effective in the red zone and so effective in the passing game, and we just haven't seen Edwards-Helaire pop in the same way, even against light boxes, even against defenses that are loading up to stop Patrick Mahomes. And the problem that you have with Edwards-Helaire, and kudos to anybody who had this as a major red flag in their scouting report for Edwards-Helaire, because I loved him, and I thought the fit was great. He just can't push anybody. He can't create enough momentum in a collision to get any push. And that's a problem. I mean, he's not going to be Ray Rice. He's not going to be one of those low center of gravity backs who builds up enough momentum to win a collision. He gets overwhelmed. And the passing game, it just hasn't come the way that we thought it was for him.
Yeah.
Again, maybe Damian Williams was just better than we thought. So I'm more interested in Mecole Hardman as the beneficiary of Sammy Watkins being out,
probably.
Right.
So what do you think? What do you think's a fair measure to get for Clyde Edwards-Helaire? You're not going to get a tier 1 runner right now because you're at 75 cents on the dollar. So who's the tier 2 running back?
Well, Mostert.
Sure.
I would offer him for Mostert at this point, probably. I mean, just every time Mostert's been on the field, he just jumps off the screen. And even last week in a horrible losing effort, I mean, he still salvaged something for you. I think probably close to outscored. I think he probably did outscore Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Edwards-Helaire did have a touchdown wipe off the board by penalty on a short pass. The other thing is DeAndre Washington's lurking in Kansas City. They called him up from the practice squad. He was a healthy scratch. Darrell Williams doesn't really have much. And
no, he doesn't.
Darwin Thompson has some juice, but when he fumbled, couldn't you just feel it, Paul, when he fumbled in that game that Andy Reid's like, okay, we're not messing around with this now. We're not just going to mix in Darwin Thompson. I think when DeAndre Washington is ready, he's going to get mixed in there too. But I think that Mostert would be a guy I would look for in a 1-for-1. And if you are good at running back, maybe you picked up a James Robinson, maybe you drafted Mostert later on, or Ronald Jones, or someone else that you feel comfortable with starting every week. Then, you use Edwards-Helaire to help upgrade another position. But I do think that Edwards-Helaire is a player that we're going to look back in a few weeks, Paul, and his value is either going to be lower or higher than it is now. But it's not going to. He's continuing. The inertia is going to either reverse or it's going to continue. A similar player, Zach Ertz.
Oh, geez.
Oh man, it feels like there's a lot of clucking and flapping about Zach Ertz in the eagle nest.
Yeah, well,
Eagles cluck.
We're only a few weeks removed from Zach Ertz, right around the start of the season, feeling insulted by the trade offers he was getting. Right. Well, okay, great. Your 9-yard performance 2 weeks ago and your 6-yard performance you're not carrying an offense. Now, undoubtedly he's getting extra defensive attention because of the dearth of wide receivers that they've got, but I don't care. And he's still been targeted 11 times, and he's turned those 11 targets into 15 yards. That's and I'm sure some of that's on Wentz, and But nevertheless, this is the fact that he has scored 1 touchdown and has been under 42 yards in every game but one has been a massive disappointment, and magnified by the fact that Dallas Goedert's not there to eat up anything that he should be getting. He should, he's on the field constantly and producing nothing. And this is as under talked about and as stunning a reversal as any this season.
Is he a sabotage drop, Paul?
The old sabotage drop.
Yeah.
No, I can't. I'm not there yet. I'm not dropping him outright just to burn somebody's fab. I'm not to that stage yet. And most likely somebody doesn't have a tight end in the wings that's waiting that you feel a lot more comfortable with. I'm not. I can't go there yet. Are you to that point where you're ready to walk away?
No, I'm not, because I can feel the consternation around the team of we have to get this going. We, the glass half full, glass half empty. Glass half full. I've mentioned this on a couple of shows already this week, so listeners, thank you for being patient. Glass half full is he's caught 20 of 21 catchable targets, I think, something like that, and it's mostly just uncatchable targets that is keeping him coming up short. And he looks sluggish because he's getting the shorter targets when he's supposed to produce after the catch, but he's not really supposed to produce after the catch. That's not his game. That's never been his game. Benjamin Solak, who does tremendous work, draft work, and is very familiar with the Eagles, said that he's just getting bullied at the stem and is not able. That's where the timing's getting thrown off. That's where everything's getting thrown off.
Really?
I don't know if that's going to change. I do think that you're going to see a squeaky wheel kind of moment here.
Yeah, don't you think so?
Yeah, where they're going to try to get him involved against Baltimore. I mean, you're not going to attack Baltimore's corners. You're going to try to attack them in the middle of the field. So this could be a last stand kind of week for Ertz. But I wouldn't be surprised to see it get corrected in a way that, if you put him in a DFS lineup, I don't know what the price is this week or something like that, you're happy. So I'm with you, Paul. I'm not saying he's a sabotage drop. If anything, he's a buy low because you can get him for like 10 cents on the dollar. Because there's always that measure, we're on the couch, of frustration. And especially if someone's been starting Ertz over even someone modestly producing like Eric Ebron, and you're leaving that on your bench and it's the margin of victory, right? If I had started Ebron over Ertz, I would have won.
Right, yeah.
That's where I call it the spite drop, not quite the sabotage drop, where you drop someone just because you're angry. That was Brandon Cooks last week. People were dropping him after the 0.
Right.
And they're not feeling great about that.
Well, don't you think Ertz is a candidate for something similar to that? Yeah. And maybe it's not Baltimore, although Baltimore has struggled with tight ends, and they've hardly seen any good tight ends. You get the feeling that nobody would be surprised if Ertz turned in a 7-catch, 90-yard, 1 or 2 touchdown performance even as early as next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go off the rails as we usually do, because there's any number, fantasy football has actually been quite a hot beat with all kinds of interesting layers this year. No way we could even come close to covering them all. Before we turn the page and go off the rails, Paul, is there anything that you want to announce, shout out there? And for us, folks know, you find Paul's work in lots of great places. This is by far not the only chance you get to hear his work in a given week.
Well, I know you've already done an entirely separate a waiver wire either podcast, right? So you've already talked Chase Claypool a lot, but
sure, no, but what do you think?
Oh, so legit. Loved him in college. The athleticism, the leaping ability, the contested catches. Not even remotely surprised that he's thriving here now. And I'll go back to a conversation you and I had in the preseason. I think Chase Claypool is going to create an early end to Juju Smith-Schuster's career in Pittsburgh. And when a team that's got salary cap issues I think they're going to look at Juju and just say, we just can't re-sign you as a free agent next year. And I think this is going to be the end for Juju at the end of this year. And I think Chase Claypool will assume the mantle as the number 1 receiver by that time, if not earlier.
Yeah, I think unless he takes a sweetheart deal, a real true hometown discount, and we'll see where the cap number comes in next year. But for the Steelers, they got Cam Hayward signed, and that once that happened, then you can say, well, that's the guy they're going to keep from their 2021 free agent class. It's not going to be easy. And Claypool, I mean, I'm glad to be wrong about him, that he can feast against, and it is the Philly corners, but against NFL outside corners. And his game, I got to mention the name, Ike Hilliard, the wide receiver coach for the Steelers. By the way, on Justin Herbert I feel like every time we talk about Justin Herbert, we have to say Pep Hamilton. Really?
He that guy drove me up a wall when he was offensive coordinator for the Colts.
Right.
He was killing me during that stretch. And I it's taken me a long time to get over the grudge, but what he's done with Justin Herbert's just amazing.
Yeah, he's prepared him. You can see it. He has him ready for the task that he's undertaken. And Ike Hilliard, the Steelers lost Darryl Drake, their wide receiver coach, tragically during training camp last year. And they went through the season without replacing him. And Ike Hilliard's in there. And I think you got to give a nod to Ike Hilliard for what Chase Claypool's doing. And even Deontay Johnson back injury, whether he plays or not. You can't put Claypool has a similar outlook, say, to Michael Gallup now, and probably a better quarterback. So take that as you will. Okay, we got like 9 minutes, and obviously for us, Paul, this should be like 3 hours, and barely would even touch on everything we want. But let's not to get too heavy, but at the same time, it's very unburdening. It's very uplifting when we get a chance to spend time together, and our audience is part of that. Mental health checks. This is our third visit since the pandemic started. Mental health check. Paul Charchian, how are you?
I'm doing better than any of our previous check-ins because the state of the world is at a certain amount of peace for me. And in Minnesota, I don't have civil unrest right now. So that part's been good. It was all very, very personal. It was all very close to me in a way that almost nothing else was during the summer. And right now I'm in a very good spot. And I think for me personally, football is normalcy. And, I get into my groove and I do this on Monday and this on Tuesday and this on Wednesday. And I repeat it 17 times. And I think you're probably very much the same way, Sig. We've got these things that we do. And while we have all of these unique challenges and things that are really testing fantasy managers in ways that we've never been tested before, not knowing if a game will be played is all new, uncharted territory for us. But I love it. I'm thriving on the challenge, and I'm encouraging people to just see this as an opportunity to separate your skills as a fantasy manager over the pack and the rest of the people in your league that are mostly the type that aren't up for that challenge. And so I've enjoyed being back into the flow of football, being back into my job, and I'm trying to see the best in situations like we have on a Tuesday night football game. How about you, Sig?
Yeah. Well, I could go on and on and on. But I think, right, by the way, if you're listening to us, folks, then either you're playing fantasy football or at least you used to, and you still like listening to the show, bless your heart. But it comes back to fantasy football being a measure, just like the NFL, of perseverance, staying focused on your goal through whatever changes and setbacks come. And in that way, it maps to football well. So for people who are sticking out and making the best decisions they can, and also this is like hats off to commissioners, because everything else in our society, somebody has to take responsibility for keeping things going during hard times and make calls, even if they're calls that make some people unhappy.
Yeah.
And commissioners are doing that. And fantasy football still provides us that on-ramp to engage with the game, and the game is still incredible. Ryan Fitzpatrick, right? It's people at the very edge of their capabilities, sometimes failing miserably, sometimes transcending, but it's so vicarious to live through that, watching that every week. Like Mike Williams on that final play last night. That was a tremendous game, by the way. If there's a better game all year, then I can't wait to see it.
And saying, how about Alvin Kamara, that catch down the sidelines, which they had to get the score on that drive as well.
Yeah,
that catch was amazing. And
how about Mike Williams?
Williams was going undrafted. Remember, he rolled into the season hurt, and nobody wanted to touch him. He was going to miss a couple of games, and he has been good. And granted, none of us saw Justin Herbert doing this and unlocking part of what he's done. But I don't want to take anything away from Williams either, who I think has played really, really well.
And he's just perfect for Justin Herbert.
Isn't he?
Perfect.
That deep ball. Oh, yeah.
It's shared experience, too. Like, we can talk about this and even while we're watching the games. And shared experience is what we're all missing. One thing I want to say, everybody is depressed. I mean, if you're not depressed right now, I guess it's because you're situated to benefit from what's been going on. But even then, I would hope you take a step back and feel the sadness of the world welling up around you, and see the world is about more than just you, because everybody's running on less oxygen right now. Fair? Is that fair, Paul?
Oh, for sure.
Everybody.
We have unprecedented challenges, and we are 6 months into it.
Yeah, and there's not an end in sight like tomorrow or next week or next month.
No.
And social interaction is oxygen for us. In New Orleans more than anywhere else. And I'll probably start weeping, Paul, when I think about what has been lost in New Orleans, what has been lost in so many places.
Well, tell me about New Orleans. In my mind, when I think about walking outside in New Orleans in the warm weather, and I think of crowds and people and interaction and strangers that are all together, mixing pot. And I don't know what it's like. Is it anything like that anymore in New Orleans?
No. Well, I mean, it may be in little pockets kind of under the radar. The mayor, LaToya Cantrell, has actually seemed committed to trying to keep the coronavirus numbers low. But that's causing, I don't know if you saw the latest, is like the Saints are threatening to play their home games in Baton Rouge.
I saw that.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
The best way I can describe it is, public life is everything here. Public life is everything. Festivals, Mardi Gras, second lines, live music, drinking out in the courtyard with everybody. It's everything. It's everything in the city.
Yeah.
It's like the reason to live in New Orleans, and it's all been. Paul. It's like that person. Everybody knows that person in your scene that just is the straw that stirs the drink. Is the person that makes you want to live. And in New Orleans, that's public life, and it's like that person fell into a coma. And nobody knows what's going to happen. We have to just keep living our lives. But
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just so sad. It's just so sad. And I don't want to downplay how sad it is everywhere else that public life has this obstacle to happening. But the main thing, reason I bring this all up, is just that I think everybody should cut themselves some slack, cut each other some slack. And maybe we can help find some togetherness through just bonding, sharing through how this is difficult and continues to be difficult, because I think we're still having trouble acknowledging it, Paul.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think people are aware that other people are struggling. But I think to a great degree, a lot of us are just trying to take care of ourselves and our immediate family, and it's hard. It's hard to have all the empathy and understanding and outreach that you want to have for your friends and your extended family. Here in Minnesota, it couldn't be more different culturally than New Orleans. In Minnesota, we are introverts. We go, and when October, November gets here, we go into our houses, we go into our igloos. And we don't get out of the igloo until March. And we're sort of built for these, this internalization. We are less social than most places. It's almost, like I said, almost the opposite of New Orleans. But what I'm wondering about now, it's gonna be fascinating from a Minnesota standpoint, is, so we went through a winter where we were entirely inside and we were non-social. And then we went through a summer where we were entirely inside. And now here comes another winter. We're going to do 18 months of this, and it's going to be very tricky here. I think it's going to be challenging even for us to get through this.
Yeah, uncharted territory. And there's a reason that life forms and the earth have these cycles, because it's replenishing. Everything comes back to life in the spring, and we bask out in the sun in the summer so we can get through the winter. And like you said, we haven't been properly able to do that. But we still find ways to be involved in each other's lives virtually and directly with, safe distancing or masks or otherwise taking care of each other. And always gathering around. We enjoy each other's company, and we enjoy what life has to offer. And it still has a lot to offer. And in a lot of ways, we're still very lucky. And I always come back, Paul, to our ancestors faced a lot harder. Each of us has in our DNA people that overcame. Each of us, and I know we could go on a whole Armenia tangent. Look it up, folks. Look up what's
going on right now in Armenia is a disaster that nobody knows about.
No, because it's just what's the times. But the point is that each of us have in our DNA the DNA of survivors that survived much, much harder times than this, much longer odds, much more difficult things. And our ancestors found ways to live meaningful, innovative, purposeful lives against much greater senseless death and injustice and all the things that we have to face. So hopefully we can rally around each other and rally around Ryan Fitzpatrick, right? He's our we'll make our offerings to the altar.
Our ancestors did it without an iPhone 12.
Yeah,
that's they did it through society and collaboration and sheer will and
taking it head on. No sugarcoating any of it.
Yeah.
And we may not necessarily have that in our Constitution, but we have all of our connections to each other. So thank you, everybody. As always, we love you. Thank you for giving us the privilege of doing this. All hail Ryan Fitzpatrick. Stay classy.